Hi, curious friend. Welcome to Building Your Best Brain podcast. Hope you're having a lovely start to your week, middle of your week, end of your week, whenever you are listening to this. I just got back from a quick trip from my hometown. So I'm from Ottawa, and I planned this trip to have a nice little juicy break, to see some family, to see some friends in between, kind of getting my experiments done, and then transitioning to full-fledged thesis writing, which I'm looking forward to. But one of the things I was looking forward to the most was honestly recording this podcast because we're doing, again, if you've hopped in here for the first time, all good. But the theme for this month and maybe more is the inside out brain, this concept that the way that our brain is active, so our brain activity, our internal state, how that influences the world around us, in particular, how it influences other people. And it's basically busting, debunking, adding different nuances to the idea that we don't have any control over our external circumstance, over how people respond to us, over our external world. This is simply not the case. And the topic that we're focusing on in this umbrella of the inside out brain is our beliefs. And this has been the bane of my existence. This, at times, is a sticking point for sure. And I almost, when I was putting this episode together, thinking about kind of what stories to talk about, what studies to pull from, I get a bit emotional just because it is such an important factor when it comes to how the world responds to us. And it's almost annoying. At times when I do this work, I find it annoying, but it is perfect. Sorry, if you are seeing me on video, I'm using my sweet baby Alto, my cat. I use her cat tree as my podcast stand. Honestly, it's the perfect height, but at times I feel like she uses it the most when I'm recording. Another topic for another time. But beliefs are so incredibly important. It gets me emotional thinking about how the work I've done on my beliefs has changed my life so far. And even thinking about how that change for me in some ways has only started. And this won't be the case for you because, I'll get into some juicy studies. I'll get into how this works in the brain, and you can start shifting these things right away. And I'll provide you some resources as well. But it's not who's smarter. It's not who's more talented, who's more gifted. It is who believes in themselves more, which took me a very long time to buy into, to understand, and to implement. But now that I've experienced what I've experienced, I've read what I've read, I've helped other people work on their beliefs. It is so true. And one that I revisit all the time, and I would say is probably the most important part of my work. The work that I do with others, but the work that I do on myself is building beliefs in my brain that are rock solid, super strong, because that is what's going to get me to the goals that I want, whether it comes to career, whether it comes to finances, personal, right? So, like health goals, relationship goals, family goals, really, it comes to the belief you have in yourself. Do you think you are capable of getting there, of getting yourself across the finish line, of showing up for yourself? And yes, the actions are important. Don't shoot the messenger, but the belief is more important. You need both. You definitely can't have one or the other, but I am somebody that the way that I grew up, what I absorbed, what I thought was important, a belief that I have, that I continuously work on, is this idea that if you do enough, right? So if we focus solely on the action, doing all the things, doing it all correctly, doing it all perfectly, then I can for sure get where I want to go. And in my life, that proved over and over again to not be true. But when I started shifting and focusing on the belief of that I am capable, that I have the raw gifts, that I have the capabilities, that I'm inherently special and unique, that those things are what's going to help me carry myself to that finish line, then it started to click. But the actions alone, doing things perfectly, right? So having the right equipment, saying all the perfect words, having all of the background knowledge that one could possibly stuff in their brain is not enough. But the belief definitely is. And this is something that's been a topic of interest, I would say more recently, maybe in the last 5, 10 years, when it comes to popular science media. So there's a few really big books out there from some really big names that look at this. So, for example, there's the Biology of Belief. Yes, I got that right. By Bruce Lipton. You Are the Placebo by Joe Dispenza, and a really recent book that I haven't read, which is Beyond Belief by Near Eagle. And it's something that we're starting to integrate into everyday life. And there's other big names as well that work on this aspect of belief. And it's because having this belief built in our brain genuinely changes the external world. And this is true for me when I think about my dating history. So I am a child of divorce. I know there's probably quite a few people that are listening that are also children of divorce. And luckily it didn't happen at too early of an age, but it happened at an age, I believe it was maybe 8 or 9, where it did bring in beliefs about relationships, right? So just the idea of what a family unit is capable of. What does love really mean? Can people really stay together and genuinely love each other for their entire lives? You know, through health, through sickness, through hard times and good times. And for me, and I think this happens a lot with others as well, is it brought into question my lovability. So how lovable was I as a partner? How desirable would I be as a partner? Could I, based off of who I am, be able to have a long, healthy, loving relationship? And I remember feeling that really young. And that carried that kind of, I talk about it and I'll put it in the show notes, right? Your stress circuit, right? Your kind of your core beliefs and thoughts and judgments. And they kind of carry throughout your life and get stimulated under stress in different ways. But a belief is a thought you keep repeating, a circuit that keeps activating. That is your truth. So in this case, based off of, partially how I grew up, I was also very sensitive as a kid, right? So I internalized it and made it mean something about me. And it was also just where I was at in terms of my development. Because, I had a lot of love at home, right? So it was really like, like I was well taken care of. I had everything I needed in terms of like food and clothing. And, I had a sister, I had extended family. Like there was definitely a lot of access to love in the home. But the idea of the divorce really brought into question and implanted this new belief I had that I was not lovable as I was, and that a relationship for me would be challenging to have a healthy, loving, long-term relationship. And that was really deeply, deeply planted. And, that was showing up all over when I was having relationships in high school. And then I had a few relationships in early adulthood where that showed up as well. And these partners were great partners, right? Like these partnerships didn't have any abuse of any kind. That unfortunately happened earlier on in high school, but I was past that, in therapy. I don't think I was on medication on that time. That was a bit later, but definitely things were more under control in the mental health department, but definitely still had flare-ups. And this belief I had about relationships and about me in particular in relationships was still super present. And what's beautiful about these two relationships I had, which both lasted under 2 years, like around a year and a half, was that I learned a lot about relationships and I learned a lot about myself. And I remember after my last relationship, which didn't really end, it did end amicably. That word is hard to say, amicably. Sorry, friends. It ended well when you look at the long scale, but it was definitely a lot of heartbreak for me. I definitely had a lot of hope in that relationship and I really wanted it to go the distance and it didn't. And it really broke my heart. And walking away from that relationship, I learned a lot about what I wanted for my next relationship. And in particular, what I wanted from the partner, the person, but also what did I want to bring to the relationship, which is equally, friends, it is equally important, both sides. It is a relationship after all. It's not just on one person to to be everything for you, right? And I'm trying to think. I was single. So after that breakup and doing that processing and taking some time to myself, I was single for almost 4 years, maybe even more. And I was going on dates primarily through dating apps and, meeting people. I remember I was seeing a therapist at the time and she was very much like, it's a numbers game, like just, probability, just like take your chance, do your thing. And, I met the majority of people that I met were not a good fit, but there were a few that, after the first or second date, I was like, wow, like, these guys have a lot going on. We have a lot in common. There's things that I see that have a lot of potential for this relationship that I desire. And the thing was something that I did not work on during this time of reflection was the belief I had that I, Sylvie LaHaye, was capable of a long, loving, fulfilling, healthy relationship. And so when I would meet these men who had these promising qualities, showed interest in me, were basically green flags, I never really got excited. I would get almost in a panic because it was kind of like, oh, like this is it. And then I would put a lot of pressure on myself because I was basically embodying and rehashing and, reactivating this belief that that I can't do this. And the way that how that would translate in terms of my actions was being really critical of myself, trying to show up perfectly, do things perfectly, and being also pretty critical of them, but not critical in the sense that I was being mean, but that I was maybe like overanalyzing messages or reading deeply into when they responded to me or when they planned the next date or if I had to plan the next date and really putting a lot of pressure on myself for that dating these men that had like great qualities and were fun to be around wasn't really enjoyable. It was really, really anxiety inducing. And it's also partially because I had this belief, it's kind of funny. I had this belief that I wasn't able to have a loving, lasting relationship, but I really wanted a loving, lasting relationship. So the desire was really high and my belief was really low. And this discrepancy was exhausting and draining. And for most of these interactions, what ended up happening, oh, sorry, so sorry, guys. Alto, like, she's like climbing all over me and is maybe not liking this story this much. Honey, it's okay. It's all right. It's all right now. There's a happy part to this story. My goodness. All right, I'm just gonna pick her up. Yeah, there's a happy part to this story. You're okay. Most of these relationships, what happened was that they ended really abruptly, usually in a unexplained way from the guy's part. And, it was either like they went on a trip and they weren't telling me when they were coming back. That was not a fun one. Another one would be, not over their ex, and they didn't realize until dating me that they were not over their ex. Or yeah, that all of a sudden they were simply not ready to be in a relationship right now. And I kept thinking, like, oh, it must be like who I'm picking, right? I'm just not picking right. If I, maybe there was like a red flag that I missed or signs that I missed. But a large part, and we'll get into the science behind it, is that they probably sensed this belief that I had and this pressure I was putting on myself, and that something just didn't quite sit right, that they couldn't really explain. And so they had to kind of come up with some, I don't know, like it's not a trap door, but like escape door, where they just kind of have to like leave quickly. They're like, I don't know, something's not right. I just gotta get out and I can't explain it. And so after enough of these have happened and you know, I I realized that, I didn't want to date that way anymore. That it was really not great for my stress response, not great for my nervous system. And I started working on the belief that who I am, as I am, is more than enough for a loving, healthy, committed relationship. And I try to think how long ago it was. Aw, guys, it would be 3 years ago almost to the date that I met my current partner, and we had a great first date. It was funny. So I worked on this belief, and we had a great first date, lots to chat about, and he didn't want the date to end, and I was moving to the apartment I'm in now, and he was like, I don't want the date to end. And I was like, well, I need to go pick up some things at Canadian Tire. You're more than welcome to come. And we're chatting. I'm not thinking about it. And then I realized I was going to Canadian Tire to buy cockroach traps because I was leaving. I was leaving my current place because there was an infestation that they couldn't get under control. And so, yeah, that was a fun thing to explain when we got there. And I remember the early stages of us dating, the first couple weeks, that a lot of the same stress and pressure came up, right? Like, reading into his messages, freaking out if he didn't respond to me in a certain window of time. We also had long stretches where I was traveling and he was traveling when we were early on in dating. So there was long stretches we weren't seeing each other. And I was having this kind of internal freak out. But I remember even as I was working through this belief that I kept coming back to it and building on it and regulating my stress and really just leaving it be. And that was the first time in dating history for me that I was really just letting it be, letting him text as much as he wanted to text me, plan dates as he wanted to plan it, and not overthink and plan ahead and be super critical. And luckily, you know, he has a lot of great things going on, and we are a really good match for each other. But I wouldn't have been surprised if it didn't work out, if I did not work on this belief, because there would have been something that he would say, like I'm looking at the things on paper, I'm with you in person, like everything's checking out, we're great fits for each other, but there's just something here that doesn't smell right or doesn't taste right. And honestly, it is no surprise that I've continued to build this belief and that we're coming up on 3 years and we live together and our relationship really does deepen in terms of depth, connection, attraction as time passes. And I am getting emotional, if you can see on camera, and maybe hear it in my voice, because I, through this relationship, get to be a better version of myself every day. And not in a way of, I kind of like biohacking and trying to be perfect, but that I get to be more and more myself and more regulated through this relationship, which was exactly what I was hoping and dreaming of when I was out there dating, single, and really, really struggling. And it's largely because the biggest difference is that I worked on this belief. And it's not a coincidence that working on this belief, I met the partner I have today, and we've been able to have this relationship for more than 3 years now, where truly after the few relationships I did have, after a year, it would always deteriorate, always. And the last couple months were always the worst. That would inevitably lead to a breakup. And this is because when it comes to beliefs in your brain, they do change your brain physiology. That does translate to changes in your body, and that does translate to changes on how people perceive you, receive you. And there's three things that I want to touch on in terms of neuroscience that are related to this. One that we'll dive into is the placebo effect. And the other one that I'll dive into is classical conditioning, which is more of a psychological phenomenon, but there have been neuroscience follow-up studies with it, as well as mirror neurons, which we touched on the last episode. But placebo, the term placebo comes from the Latin word I shall please. And it was used in medieval times as a sham treatment. So that's a treatment that is not really a treatment to help with comforting patients. So basically, patients that weren't able to be treated were given a placebo to help comfort them. And in the 18th century, physicians started noticing that even though these treatments were not treatments in the sense that there was no drug, there was no active component to it, that there were positive psychological effects on these people. And the first documented placebo was in 1799 by Dr. John Hayart. And he demonstrated real measurable effects with rheumatism in particular. And this really kicked off the implementation of placebo, right? So we have them in clinical trials because simply telling somebody that they're getting a treatment for something is enough to produce positive effects on their body. So if you're figuring out in clinical trials, right, if a drug is actually effective, then you need to see if it's more effective than the placebo. And what's cool is that people have taken it beyond that, right? So they started looking to see if the inverse was true, which they call a nocebo, which is kind of fun, where they do tell people that they're not going to get a treatment or that they're going to get a treatment that is like has a lot of side effects. And what's interesting is that they will worsen their symptoms by simply being told that or given that. And really, placebo, when it comes to our brain, has been best studied when it comes to pain management. And this can be for all different types of pain, right? So they've done it for migraines, they've done it for nerve pain, back pain. They have termed this placebo anesthesia. And it's really well studied to the point that they've been able to have a mouse model of it. And now, what's cool with having a mouse model of something, right? So they've studied this in humans, and they'll do things like put them in different brain scanners to look at brain activity, and they do see specific areas light up that are related to anesthesia, anesthesia. There's like a few letters that are different, such as the periductal gray area, which is full of natural opioids in our brain and helps with pain relief. But with the mouse model, you can do a lot of different manipulations and really dive into the mechanism more. And what they found is when they were able to give this placebo anesthesia treatment, which is wild to do in mice, considering that, you can't tell a mouse that is getting a placebo. But so that even in itself is really interesting how powerful the placebo effect is. But they were able to find the exact pathway. So some of the regions that were important here were the anterior cingulate cortex. This is a region in the middle of the brain, which is a limbic region and has a lot of sensory processing, especially for kind of like emotional cognitive information. They projected to the pontine nucleus, which then projects to the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is involved in movement, posture, among many other things. But the pontine nucleus is the one that has a lot of the opioid receptors and is really involved when it comes to relieving pain in the body. And so the idea here is that when it comes to placebo, placebo, you could argue, really is a belief, right? You're being told, you go to a clinic, you're being told you're getting a state-of-the-art, one-of-a-kind drug trial treatment that has been shown to have promising results in X, Y, Z, and is going to help you in this area, that area, this area. That, and you believe that you're getting that drug and it's going to help you, even when you get a sugar pill, it's going to help you. And so this is where people in different areas, right? So kind of the books I mentioned or some of the big players of the field that I mentioned focus on placebo effect and belief so much in everyday life, because if you have a genuine belief let's say, that you're going to be more than capable to have your dream career, your body and brain activity is going to change to make that more of a reality. And what that means is that it's going to get you to perceive things differently. And we'll talk a bit about that when it comes to the classical conditioning soon, because this idea of building a circuit is through repetition and stimulation, right? Cells that fire together, wire together. And so if you're having a belief and then having that belief gets you to notice more things that affirm that belief, what's going to get stronger? The belief is going to get stronger, right? So a lot of these pain things, right, is similar. You know, you think you're getting a cream that is going to relieve your pain, and so instead of simply focusing on the pain, you're focusing on the relief from the pain and going, "Oh, it's working." And then you continue to focus on that, the circuits in your brain start to change, and then your body also starts to change because you're releasing different hormones, you're releasing different chemicals. So the receptors will start to change, their expression will start to change. It's really a incredible, incredible cascade of events that happen. And classical conditioning is a very interesting aspect to this as well. Classical conditioning is something that birthed really early on in psychology based off of Pavlov's work with his dogs. So if you're not aware of this experiment, it's basically what he did was he had dogs and he would feed these dogs and pair them being fed with a little bell, a little chime. And so they would ring the bell and feed the dogs, ring the bell, feed the dogs. Then, after a period of training in this scenario, he would ring the bell and then the dogs would drool. They would salivate because they were anticipating to get the food as well. And this is what we call classic conditioning, which is this idea that we're pairing things together. And through this pairing, we have different physiological responses in our body. And what's cool is that this really ties into expectations. Expectations. And that's a part of the belief as well, right? So when I think about my dating history and the belief I had around not being able to have the relationship that I want and desire, in a way, that is what I was looking for. And that's kind of what I was expecting. I was, of course, bummed when I would get the, I'm going on a trip, I don't know when I'll be back text, or I'm actually not over my ex, sorry text. There was a part of me that expected it. And there was a part of me, because of this belief I had, that also kind of created the scenarios for that to be the case. And what's interesting is that this pairs really well with placebo, and they have done imaging studies where they're looking at, okay, when people expect that they're getting the treatment, they expect that they're getting the drug that's going to help them, they believe it. What is the response that they have at the level of their brain when they're expecting positive outcomes? And what they've seen is that there's a lot of prefrontal cortex activation, which is amazing because that really goes well with cognition, attention, noticing, right? Noticing the positive outcomes. There's also the anterior insula, which is very close to the anterior cingulate cortex, which is involved in a lot of effective emotional processing, as well as, which I find really interesting, the nucleus accumbens. And we have a lot of dopamine in our nucleus accumbens and is associated with the pleasure aspect, the reward aspect. So having a belief that you're reinforcing and you're growing, you're going to be paying more attention to it based off of the activity in the prefrontal cortex. You're going to be really emotionally connected to it based on the anterior cingula, and you're going to be motivated to keep going because you're getting little dopamine hits, which is super, super fascinating. And what's cool is that with the mirror neurons, which we talked about more in depth last episode, looking at your body posture and facial microexpressions, right? So, but in short, mirror neurons, which are found all over our brain, but last week we focused on the ones in the, I like mix the words together, the premotor area, as well as the parietal lobe. Parietal's involved in somatosensory information. That's just kind of like the integration of the sensory information all over our bodies. So, kind of like our touch, temperature, things like that. So, inputs, right? Sensory inputs. And then premotor is involved in a lot of motor planning. So, kind of the execution of motor movements. We focus on those areas, and mirror neurons are neurons that turn on when you observe somebody doing a motor action. You'll have the same mirror neuron activity as they do, even though you're not doing it and you're observing it. And they have looked at this in the context of pain, and people can tell, even in really, really subtle ways, that other people are in pain. We're really alarmingly good at it, even if we're not aware of it, right? And that's the kicker because we don't need our frontal lobe to be involved when it comes to mirror neurons. They just can fire on their own through inputs, through observing. And this is where, because people don't need their frontal lobe for this to happen, you can have this whole something's just not right, but I can't put my finger on it, which means that you can do everything perfectly, right? You can have the right strategy. You can work your butt off. You can look beautiful. I'm thinking my dating example, right? Like you can have your hair perfect, makeup done, nails did to the nines, and they'll still be like something's not quite right. And that's because through their mirror neuron activity, they can sense this belief you have that's being active, and it's probably being active while you're doing those things, right? Like when I was on those dates, I think besides the first date, I was really good at not putting any pressure on myself when it came to the first date. But once it came to the second, third, fourth, fifth, that circuit was active all throughout those dates. And I'm sure I am not contacting any of them, of course. And if you want to, you're not, I'm not giving you their information. Sorry, not sorry. Um, they knew, I think, in some way that this was happening, but they could not put their finger on it. And they kind of just deemed me as not a good fit. Or they just kind of, it was so funny. They just like had to get out of there. It's funny now. It wasn't funny during. And this is where, if you are finding that you're implementing all the actions, you're doing the work, and you're not really getting the results or the response that you think you should be getting or that you want to be getting, it might be time to start digging into your beliefs, your internal truths that are growing every time they get stimulated and they're getting stronger, right? So the way that that positive expectations worked, the negative expectations are the same. They also grow. You also have your frontal lobe that is looking for the negative things, reinforcing that emotion, which is probably not a pleasant emotion. And then getting that little like nucleus hit, right? Your nucleus accumbens hit because you found it and reinforced it. And now you feel not so great. And when you start identifying these, I want to see if you can challenge yourself to bring a bit of lightness to it. Like I mentioned before, when I was dating the partner that I'm with now in the early days, this belief wasn't fully baked yet. And it doesn't have to be in order for you to make progress. But I knew that I was working towards it, and I felt a lot of relief knowing that I owed it to myself to believe in myself. And what's interesting was it didn't really, because it can sound kind of selfish, which, I don't think believing in yourself is selfish, but, that could maybe be argued. It's more that if I didn't work on this, I wasn't going to have a chance of having a family, being a mom, and giving the gifts and the qualities that I have to another person, right? To another generation, I guess, if you will. And that I owed it to myself for those, this sounds a little dramatic, but it's where I'm going, for those future unborn children. Because there's things that you have that only you have. And if you don't believe in yourself, nobody gets to benefit from your gifts. Gifts being even as simple as being kind to people every day, or being a great listener, or being able to explain things in a way that, a handful of people wouldn't be able to understand, but now they can because of how you explained it. They're not going to be able to access your gifts, your learnings, be able to change their life because you don't believe in yourself. And even if you said the exact same things to them without this belief as you would with this belief, even though it's great information, they're simply not going to believe it because there's always just going to be something a little off. They're like, it's great. Obviously, this person's knowledgeable, knows what they're talking about, but I don't know if this is the whole story. Maybe I need to go somewhere else to get the life change that I want, or, you know, they said this nice thing about me and like the words were great, but I don't know. Maybe they didn't mean it. I don't know. Something was just a little off. And the lightness really comes in when you recognize that you're not doing this just for you. And this belief in yourself is going to help so many other people. And it's not a step that we can sleep on. It's really not a step that we can sleep on. So, with that, I'm going to close this episode. This was really, I don't know how you guys, let me know how you receive this, because over here on this side of the camera, this side of the mic, I'm going through a whirlwind of emotions in the best way. Beliefs to me are so important, and we're able to build them in our brain. And that's something that I'm going to be screaming from the rooftops probably for the rest of my life. And if you want to learn more about this, one really great step that you can take is to sign up for my free webinar series. It's called Pick My Brain series, and it's a different topic, but we follow, for the most part, topics along the podcast. They've been happening multiple times a month, right? 2, 3 times a month, usually on Mondays, but I do change the time just to help people be able to come. I know everybody's schedule is different and everybody's in different parts of the world. These webinars are designed to answer your questions, whether it's deeper in the science you want to go, whether it's you started or you're thinking about applying this in your everyday life, but you don't know where to start, or you have started and you're noticing some interesting things. You're also a little curious about other things, or you're feeling stuck. This is what this webinar is all about. So I'll leave a link in the show notes for where you can sign up to get these emails about the webinars. And if you can't make them live, you can always email in your questions. I do prioritize people live, but I do try to incorporate as many questions as I can because we really all benefit from each other's questions. Honestly, more so than me sitting here yapping at you for an hour. As much as I love it, I find that questions really spark other questions and really expose the holes when it comes to knowledge, and in particular when it comes to implementation, which is really the most important part of this work, is starting to integrate it into your everyday life so that your brain can change to support the fullest version of you. I'm wishing you a wonderful rest of your day, and I really look forward to continuing the Inside Out Brain with you. Take care. Have a good one. Bye.